So thank you very much for this, and it's very touching, the stories we've heard tonight. I'm just going to give you a bit of my own story from refugee to RI New York Circle, and it really, TED, of course, the conference. I had the opportunity in 2009 to give a talk about my family's escape from the Khmer Rouge. It was based on a New York Times piece I did for the Sunday magazine with my mother. It was a story about how she used her cunning and determination to save 5 children. And I had 6 minutes then to tell it. I've got a few more tonight, 8. But I also want to give you a sense of what Refugees International means to me because of that connection that Eileen and Sam talked about. So, I'm spoiling it for those who haven't seen the talk, but at the end, my mother is there. She gets a standing ovation. My wife, 8 months pregnant at the time, is also there. And my, it's Ted, Bill Gates is there. I had a feeling that, she was 73. We wouldn't have much of an opportunity, perhaps, to do this again. And 7 months later, she passed away. So really, this is an opportunity to retell and to memorialize what she accomplished in her life. So in 5 acts, from refugee to RI New York Circle, first Cambodia, where I was born, Vietnam, where we escaped to, France, where we became refugees, America, where we immigrated, and finally giving back, which closes the loop. So Act 1, Cambodia, right? Sam talked about this. Here, my family in 1969, mother, father. Cambodia is still relatively peaceful. There are, of course, problems happening next door. Our house, a mansion now occupied by 10 families, each to a room. Phnom Penh itself, an architectural beauty. Cambodia was known as an island of peace, the Pearl of Asia. Movies were playing like The Little Prince, except it actually starred the Prince of Cambodia. And of course, incursions were happening across the border because of the Vietnam War. More tons of bombs fell on Cambodia than in all of World War II Europe, including Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So on April 17th, 1975, Phnom Penh falls. It is a day that was seen as celebratory. The Khmer Rouge have won. Peace is finally arriving, very much like the Shabab story, right? And young people are coming in. Of course, they're not happy. They've been indoctrinated. They're Maoists. They believe the cities are the reason for all that's wrong with the country. And they evacuate 2 million people from the capital, including my own family, in 3 days, under the pretext of bombs are going to fall, U.S. bombs are going to fall. So in a mass exodus that leads everybody from the capital out to the countryside. And the leaders of the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot there on the left, Pol Pot never faced justice. He died in his sleep under house arrest. But to give you just one sense of what Cambodia was like, I'll just give you Michael Paternity's description. Once upon a time, there was a regime so evil that it created an anti-society where torture was currency and music, books, and love were abolished. This regime ruled for 4 years and murdered nearly 2 million of its citizens, a quarter of the population. Now, a quarter of the population, that's 1 in 4 people. Stalin said the death of 1 man is a tragedy, but the death of 1 million is a statistic. I think he was right about that. It's hard but true to understand it. But I want to bring it down to a lower order of magnitude, my own family. So on one day in late 1975, close to sunset, we've been sent off to Pursat province to farm collectively, essentially in concentration-like camps. And my parents have just come back from doing rice cultivation. The Khmer Rouge called a meeting in which they announced that Vietnamese citizens will be allowed to return to Vietnam. Of course, Vietnam was by then communist, so Vietnamese brothers are asking for their citizens back. And my mom had spoken some Vietnamese as a child, so she thought maybe she could pass for Vietnamese. My father didn't speak a word of it. It would create a problem potentially. On the 3rd day of our journey towards the border, my father passes away. He's been suffering from malnutrition and dysentery already, so it actually presents itself as a kind of, well, he doesn't have to actually prove that he's Vietnamese anymore because he didn't speak Vietnamese. So, Act 2, Vietnam. How do we actually get to Vietnam? It turns out that language is the passport needed. There are no documents at this point. Your ability to speak will prove whether you're Vietnamese. And my mom, in her infinite wisdom, had decided to give all the children new names, Vietnamese names. So her Vietnamese was bad, so bad that she'd given all the boys girls' names and all the girls boys' names. She did not know better. But a Good Samaritan, a Vietnamese lady who was actually testing herself, drilled her like a sergeant for 3 days. She helped her with her Vietnamese and improved my mom's Vietnamese as a result. And she was able to pass under the Khmer Rouge and then under the Vietnamese cadres, their language exam. There I am in Vietnam by then with my mom. But Vietnam, of course, was communist, and Mom didn't want us to be living in a communist country, and the only way out would be to get out to France. France was taking in non-Vietnamese citizens, so Mom decided that we were going to redeclare ourselves Cambodians. That's how smart she was. She was able to do that because she, we had the right connections. We also had we had to pay lots of bribes. All corrupt governments want money. In France, a Frenchman named Bernard Guyader helped us. He was a chain-smoking Frenchman, very stereotypical. He was a good Samaritan because he did not know us. He just wanted to do something for a family. I think he bumped into a cousin of mine one day who was living there, and the guy was despondent, and this Frenchman helped. So Bernard finds a French woman with the same last name as my mother's and convinces her to sign papers saying that she's related to us, which I don't know why anyone would do that, but she did. And he files it and jumps over fences at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to get it through. And we arrive in France in '79. Here I am with my sister. By 1985, my aunt, who lives in San Francisco, is visiting us. She says, you should move to America. It's the land of opportunity. And there's the actual Pan Am ticket. I mean, I remember flying through Kennedy Airport on a layover and seeing the skyline of Manhattan and being amazed by the sight of all that. So in America, we start a new chapter, and it begins actually with public schools, but at 16 I started at Berkeley, and the only reason why I did after getting rejected was that another Good Samaritan helped me, an admissions officer who helped me appeal the rejection from Berkeley. And then later at Princeton I got somebody to help me believe that I could actually go to a school like that, an Ivy League institution, another Good Samaritan, a dean there at the graduate school. So Good Samaritans have appeared throughout my life, and in fact, this room is full of Good Samaritans. Behind me are all the people on whose shoulders I stand. So here's a lesson. We can all be Good Samaritans to one another. And to whom much is given, much is expected. So in Act 5, I want to talk about trying to give back. After Princeton, ended up at the World Bank and was fortunate to work for the UN Development Program. I'm now, as Eileen mentioned, a professor at Occidental College. I currently serve on all these foundation and nonprofit boards. But a year ago, I was at LAX, and I met somebody who is too modest to be named, whose initials are like Star Wars. And he was a Good Samaritan. He talked with me for 15 minutes, and well, I wanted, of course, to say how much The Killing Fields meant. It was such a powerful movie, such an important movie in the story of Cambodia's struggle. And earlier this year, I was named to the board, which is pretty incredible to be able to close that circle, to close that loop. So let me talk about what RI means to me. It means closing that circle. It means trying to go back to where it all began, because RI began actually in 1979. And at the Washington Mall, at the Lincoln Memorial, Joan Baez, Sue Morton, Senator Paul Simon were having a concert trying to raise awareness about Cambodian and Vietnamese refugees, and they walked to the White House from the Lincoln Memorial. At that time, President Jimmy Carter had said no, he wasn't going to take in the boat people, he wasn't going to take in the Cambodian refugees. And Sue Martin was there, and he came out, apparently, this is well documented, Jimmy Carter came out of the back doors of the White House up to the fence and said, "I will not let your people die." He made a moral decision at that moment to send the 7th Fleet to go rescue the boat people, and to allow Cambodians, as a result, Vietnamese, and everybody else who was suffering to come and find safe refuge. So his Secretary of State, Cyrus Vance, whose son is District Attorney for New York here, was testifying before Congress, before a Senate committee, and said, "We are a nation of refugees. Most of us can trace our presence here to turmoil or oppression of another time and another place. Our nation has been immeasurably enriched by this continuing process. We will not turn our backs on our traditions. We must meet the commitments we have made to other nations and to those who are suffering. Doing so, we will also be renewing our commitment to our ideals." So thank you very much for listening to me tonight, and I hope that you will also be good Samaritans.